introduced. I think we had to swap it out because the video quality wasn't decent enough to show on the big screen. So it is a Shag Harbour documentary, I think, and there's a lot of people that have attended every year, so we didn't want to take up the conference each year talking about the Shag Harbour incident because a lot of folks are familiar and have heard the story before, kind of been there, done.
On the evening of October 4th, 1967.
Cases like Shag Harbour are definitely something unconventional. They're not easily explained or explained away.
And my talk, as you see, is why do UFOs keep crashing onto Canada. UFO, of course, stands for Ukrainians from Ontario, exactly. The government and military to assist in trying to understand what these UFOs were. And this is an actual document, Department of National Defense, to the Canadian government, has been actually relatively transparent in terms of providing information or admitting that they've had an interest, they've been investigating UFO cases, back then it was flying saucers, but investigating UFO cases for quite some time. And let's move ahead a little bit. March 18th, 1961, up in Northwest Territories again, copper mine. Here we have, I remember asked about the question, what does UFO stand for? Well, in this official document, it stands for Unidentified Falling Object. In June of 1969, another one crashed, this time just in the river outside of Montreal. And let's jump ahead to MacGyver's Newfoundland, actually up in Labrador. Object fell into the ocean with a loud splash, and the RCMP were actually witnesses to this. This is the actual envelope that I received. It was addressed to Ufology Research in Manitoba, which was a group that I had been associated with. This is the envelope that came in, and inside were details of a flying saucer, UFO, that was shot down by Canadian and American jets near Carp, Ontario, which is just outside of Ottawa. That there was a major retrieval operation. Aliens were captured. Some of them were actually killed by fire from the Canadian and American military that were doing the operation. The craft was taken away, and then it was all covered up. The construction crews came in with a cover. There's a lot of people who believe this actually did happen. There's actually a video taken and sent around of, you probably can find this on the line of stuff where the UFO crashed onto the frozen lake, and then there's that pyramidal UFO. This is the photo the Canadian military tried to hide. And so there have been some sketches that show what this thing supposedly looked like. Except that, well, I contacted the First Nations Bend office. They laughed and laughed. They said nothing. In fact, it turns out that the Canadian Army was doing some maneuvers on the ice. And sure enough, they had a problem with some of their planes and snowmobiles, and they landed on the ice and had to go ashore in this First Nations community. And we also found this. This is a photo that was taken by a wildlife photographer. And by golly, it's the same photo that's been photographed.
About that today, because I have a lot to share with you. A lot of people don't really know much about Quebec, Quebec. So I got to travel there in 2012, and if you can't hear me, wave. I tried to set this up so I could be close and comfortable. I traveled there in 2012 with Robert Shaw. his first trip that he led there. And a number of other interesting researchers went with us, like Linda Howe and some other good friends. I've also traveled with Hugh Newman, Brian Forrester, and I highly recommend if you want to go to an interesting ancient site like this, go with a seasoned researcher. I've also had the pleasure of traveling with John Anthony West. We were talking about that over lunch. I went to Egypt with him, and of course John and West and Robert Schoch work closely together. Some of you know that. So Robert's influenced by John West as well. So what I'm going to try to give you is like an overview of the site. And D, you'll be hearing me talk about different circles because it's a complex site, so I'll try to explain that to you. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where it is located on this U-shaped hillside, very high on a plateau where you can see all over. Been uncovered with T-standing stones standing in the central circles of it. So this is a flat limestone surface area that's just been cleared and smooth, and you see this little outcropping that's a relief sculpture from the ground up, and the hole that is cut in it, the T-shaped central stone pillars that you'll be looking at from several enclosures were cemented in place into central relief platforms like this, and then around it, you'll see this is a little video, it has no sound in it, but the central T's were standing in centers like that. This one's now been gone, and this is sort of a raised edge around the outside edge where other central T pillars were standing. This is kind of a basis of what the platform bases look like excavated. And all this other area around here, and here are the vineyards that belong to the gentlemen that I showed you before. When you're at the site, standing there, you can clearly see that you are about 1,000 feet above the valley floor that's below you. And it's about 2,700 feet above sea level. So we actually stopped there on our way to Göbekli. Now, you are in a very high mountainous area, and all the other mountains are real mountains around it, as you can see in this picture. These are normal mountains. This is not. This is, if you can digest it or not, it is a mountain full of fist-sized stones that look as if they have been dropped from above. Now, next I have a quick little film clip to show that to you as I'm walking around the site with the tour guide that put together rock.
The most important site in Turkey.
In Turkey.
Yeah.
And this is obviously an artificial hill here.
Yeah.
I mean, just look here, guys, on the video. These are loose stones you can pick up with your hand. See? And it's a whole freaking mountain of loose stones. So I just felt that was important for you to get a real visual on that. So there is a history of burying, and these are T-shaped stones, as you can see here. And this is all one solid piece of stone. The only differential that appears with the upper part is shaped like a T, and there's a small refinement in depth, which makes you think that this is a separate stone from this, but it is not. And they are slightly anthropomorphic, as you will see. Before photo of the site being uncovered, and it's known that it was not covered over in cataclysm, because cataclysm would be more massive mud piles, stones tipped over. It appears that whoever buried these sites made an extreme effort to try to replace stones or even repair stones before they then put in these small little hand stones here, laid in very carefully, creating, in some cases, an exterior wall around the standing stones on the outside, and then filling them in gradually. Being uncovered. Here you can see the topsoil that's being, the surface ground area we walked in on, and we walked in this same part of the path, but by the time we were there, the circle was much larger and rounder. This was put into place as wooden tracks to take wheelbarrows of debris and stone out. But here you can see enclosure D. We're going to be speaking quite a bit about enclosure D. And these are the standing T-shaped stones on the outside, which were about 8 to 10 feet tall. And then in here, these were about 15 to 16 feet tall. And so we think this was some type of ritual place that they were using, some sort of temple where they did maybe solstice or equinox rituals, and probably honoring some form of fertility. So here's a backup picture of it, so you can see that where everything was placed, and here's a close-up of that T-pillar laid on its side, so you can see some of the carving on it. We see this H or I shape carved again on a number of these pillars that I'll be pointing out, and we see snake skull. Interesting, why so many, and why so many buried?
Now it's belonging to the 10th and 9th millennium, but we don't have the oldest layers, so maybe the oldest layers is a little bit earlier than 10th millennium, nearly 12,000 years.
So just another few quick pictures I'll show you from my on the Syrian border. It was known that Taliban often like to destroy many ancient artifacts, as they did in certain areas of the Sudan, and so they had covered them over for sun protection. And so I think we didn't get to see the fox, and some of the stones were carved. This is like a vulture holding a ball on its wing. We'll look at that more close up later. And this was enclosure D before it was uncovered to the extent that it is today. Something like this. It's a red polished stone. It's the head of a vulture. What it means, we're not clear. There are also bone shards that have been found at the site. Some people theorized, including Klaus for a while, that possibly this was a site of sky burials, where this is a tradition still observed in parts of India, where a human deceased person is cut into pieces, left high on a mountain area where vultures can then come and pick apart the bones, and that is a type of burial referred to as sky burial. Over is now under like 50 feet of water under that Ataturk dam that I had shown you. It was excavated in the 70s before they built the dam, and then they went back quickly in the 1990s when they were building the dam and took a few things out. So I'll just briefly show you a little bit here. There were T-shaped pillars in the middle of this area and Nemeli Kori that resembled exactly some of the central T-shaped stones we found in enclosure D, with arms carved down the side that kind of look anthropomorphic, and with very fine articulated edges up the front. This is an example or a visual of what this, and Nemeli Kori is only about 27 miles from where Göbekli is today. So interestingly, there are a number of overlaps, even though that's a square and the things at Göbekli were circles. This was dated around 7000 BC. How he believes that these central standing stones in circle D were some sort of stylized anthropomorphic figures.
So we have a still-sized human being, and this is a T-shaped human being, and so we understand these stone circles as a gathering, as a meeting of such stone
I'll jump ahead.
Two, it's very important, the center surrounded by other ones which are looking similar, which are smaller than this in size. So we have a still-sized human being, and this is a T-shaped human being, and so we understand these stone circles as a gathering, as a meeting of such stone beings. Two, very important, is the center surrounded by other ones which are looking similar, which are smaller than this in size.
Very human or very real. And he has similar arms that come down his side, and he seems to be holding his phallus. This is another drawing of him in black and white, so it makes it easier to see from the back of the room. And I'll point out, very interestingly, he doesn't have any distinctive clothing on, except that he has this V-shaped uniform of some sort, or necklace around his neck. It's quite interesting. He was found in pieces, three different pieces, but when put back together, he was about 6 feet tall. Raraku volcano quarry site, which I went to both with Robert Schock and with Hugh Newman. This particular moai was dug up in the 1975 and then reburied to protect him, but we just wanted to make sure, well, do they all have arms that go down and fingers that seem to pop up just like the sculptures at Göbekli? And they do, they look almost identical. So this is a little slide from Robert's presentations when he presents, and I don't know if you can see from the back of the room, but there's an arm coming down the side here, and it almost looks like this particular T-shaped sculpture has a fox under his arm. In the series of circular enclosures that have been uncovered seem to shift slightly one to the other, and they also seem to have slightly different dating. From Klaus Schmidt's work, they seem to be 1,000 years in sequence from one another, kind of going back 10,000, 9,000, 8,500. So some of the circles were built after Central Enclosure D. And what you'll hear next from Robert Schock, just briefly presenting.
And what I've done here is they have central pillars. You see the central pillars here? And I found, this is my lines that are red. These are the orientations of the central pillars. And you see how they're slightly shifting with time? Everyone see that? Okay. Where you reconstruct what the sun looked like at different times. And you look out on the vernal equinox south, because these pillars with their hands and arms are clearly facing south. And you look out, what were they seeing on the vernal equinox from pillar D, our enclosure D, about 10,000 BC, and I'm speculating here, they've been looking at 3 days towards Orion.
So I'm just going to jump ahead. Sorry this is a little noisy, this was some of my little video I took. What's very interesting is that the Starry Night program that Robert Schock looked at coincided with the dating and timing of the Klaus Schmidt research in terms of where and when these pillars would have been built. That he has been studying the plasma outburst theory. So I won't spend a long time on this, but I'll just mention the Thunderbolts group or the Electric Universe group. These are interesting plasma physicists who have been following the work of Anthony Peratt, who was a plasma physicist, worked at Lawrence Livermore Labs, and he determined and discovered when he worked with plasmas in a lab, he found similar modifications in phase waves or these different types of patterns that plasmas would make in certain stages of their intensity would represent or mimic these shapes, which he was finding in petroglyphs around the world. And Anthony was one of the first to propose that if we had massive coronal ejections in the past that would create such huge light distortions in the nighttime sky or daytime sky where you could actually see these shapes, that might be why ancient cultures carved them onto rocks, because you can find them all over the world. So these different types of shapes, like a fish or like a standing man with his arms up and these balls on the side, those are called synchrotronic light phase waves of these plasma intensities that you might
How many of you people have ever used Canva? I decided to teach myself how to do it, and I sort of fell down the rabbit hole until finally at about 200 I said, you must stop. And what these are, I'm writing a book called Strange Visitors, Close Encounters of the Hollywood Kind, and I'm trying to make it personal about what did individuals teach me about this subject, or who did I learn things from, where did my experiences come from. And so I started to put that together, and then I realized not only did I have to stop because I frankly ran out of space, but I had to stop because there's just so many names.
Proud, almost Canadian. The very first screenplay I ever wrote was something called E&G, Electronic News Gathering, which for those of you of a certain age, of which I count myself, was a big show in Canada from 1989 to 1994 on CTV, as I recall. These are American shows, or at least global shows, or whatever, but they were produced here in Canada. The first one on the left, Kay O'Brien, was the first series I ever did for CBS, and we shot that in Toronto. And it was a lot of fun. It was about a female surgeon in New York City, and Toronto doubled for New York. It was a great time. The middle one, Mantis, was a Fox show in the mid-90s about the first African-American superhero. And the irony for me is that I still have young black men to this day who say, that was a really meaningful show for me, because I was just a teenager, I was just a kid, and I never saw people that looked like me in the lead as the superhero where all the white guys were working for him, which I thought was kind of intriguing, and I'm glad to have been part of that. And that shot in Vancouver, and so did The Crow, shoot in Vancouver. Anyway, that one is not one of those, supposedly. So, I got out my camera the other day when we were in Toronto on our way here, and I said, maybe I can shoot a UFO. So I shot this UFO up close, and it was so awesome. What an experience it was that it was flares being dropped during a military exercise because of the way they were moving. So I called up the producer and I said, problem solved. It'll be a great show because they're military flares. Or maybe they were skydivers with flares. I'm not sure right now, I'm not remembering the specifics. And the producer, long pause. And then she says, don't say that on the show. And what she said I should do is don't explain what it is, just commiserate with them about how mysterious it is and whether it's extraterrestrial or interdimensional. So sometimes we are our worst enemies, right? Okay, that is actually something that I produced for a promo for a series that I'm doing called Undeniable. It's a scripted podcast. And say, well, this is my first UFO conference. I thought, I'm going to run upstairs and put together a 5-minute short version of UFO history. For those of you that already know this, bear with me. For those of you that would like to know about it for the first time, it ain't complete. It's just me with too much time and technology in my hands, putting something together on the fly. But even though you've seen ancient astronauts and you've seen ancient aliens, rather, and you understand that this thing may go back a long time, certainly the speaker before me was talking about that. If America wanted to go to nuclear war, we packed those nukes on bombers at Roswell and sent them flying. That's where it was happening back then. On day one, the newspaper headline, this one up here, is Roswell Army Air Force captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Less than 3 hours later, but on the next day's newspaper, we get General Ramey empties Roswell saucer, right? They said, we don't like this getting out like that. The guy you see on the left is Jesse Marcel. He is the guy who was an intelligence officer at the base who literally had to become the fall guy. He had to pretend that an intelligence officer at an Army air base dealing with nuclear weapons couldn't tell the difference between alien wreckage and a weather balloon. Trent of McMinnville, Oregon. And what I'm about to show you are this is the first picture, and then there's a second picture. These are salt of the earth people. They were farmers. When America said, we want proof from the summer of the saucers, I like to say it came flying in over McMinnville in 1950. Because this guy had a a universal roamer camera with 60 millimeter film was taken less than 30 seconds later, and it's the same object from a slightly different point of view. Now, what's interesting about this picture is not only is it intriguing as hell, it wasn't faked. I mean, there's no question it wasn't faked, because the Blue Book looked into it, the Condon Commission looked into it, Bruce Maccabee, who was famous for looking into these things, looked into it, and they all said, it's a real photo, it hasn't been doctored, and it appears to be of a physical object. Beyond that, we can't say what it is. Over 2 successive weekends in Washington, D.C., they are swarmed by dozens of craft that are flying in different formations. It goes on for a protracted amount of time. Everybody sees it. Every newspaper in America covers it. The Washington people are freaking out about it. It goes on 2 weekends in a row. So imagine today if that happened. I mean, that would be endgame. I mean, because one thing, my wife Jackie and I are hope to be producing a movie called Lost Honeymoon about the Betty and Barney Hill case. But it happened in 1961. It was not public until 1966. So on the timeline, America didn't start waking up and going, holy crap, they're taking people? But they did start thinking that in 1966, and it was a shock. I remember my mother was in a part of a book club. They sent the Book of the Month club, right? And The Interrupted Journey was the book. It got into my house, and I'm pretty sure she read it, but I started looking at it. I was 12 years old, and I'm looking at this thing going, what? I mean, it's radical stuff, and I have been passionate about this Betty and Barney Hill case for years. I appreciate that everybody has an opinion on this. I certainly have my opinions, but they're all semi-uninformed opinions, because the people who actually do know the most aren't sharing their work. That was true going through the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, 80s, 90s. It's true today. The people are not sharing the work. We're getting a little more out of them, but not as much as we should.
And I saw it. That was a UFO beaming back at you. Me and Eric Heisman was down in Mexico 2 weeks ago. We seen 40 of them flying in formation. They've got bases all over the world now, you know. They've been coming here ever since 1946, when the scientists first started bouncing radar beams off of the moon. And they have been living and working among us in vast quantities ever since. The government knows all about them.
I mean, if they're so small, why don't they just reveal themselves to us, huh, and get it over with?
And Jack Nicholson, it's not infamy at all, but this is the date of the modern UFO world that we're living in, and why you're probably here. On December 17th, 2017, the New York Times published their famous article that said, we have been investigating UFOs. We have a program that's been doing it, the ATIP program, and that's where you first heard about people like Lou Elizondo and others. And it was a major thing, and the only thing I have to say about it is I have a very personal story about that. My family and I like to airdrop into a location for a vacation, which is like, you know, we were in Louisiana at the time. Egos are very important in this story. You've got Tom DeLonge, rock star, Blink-182 on the left. You have Lou Elizondo, a man who ran the ATIP program in the Pentagon, and Christopher Mellon, who was the head of the Senate was the top staffer at the Senate Intelligence Committee, worked at the Department of Defense on this. These 3 guys, major guys, because they formed a company with Tom DeLonge, To the Stars Academy, since gone by the wayside. But at the beginning, these were the guys that were, I mean, they were telling the truth to people. Craft retrievals, crashes, bodies. I mean, the stuff that not so long ago was only in the National Enquirer. And suddenly it's being testified in Congress. People are taking this stuff seriously, which I assume is why a lot of you who were at your first UFO conference are here today, because you know this. You may not have heard everything about everything, but you know that something's going on that isn't what it used to be. In Congress, in front of, in the halls of Congress, before cameras, and saying non-human intelligence. Who does that for fun? Who does that to pull a prank? This is not a guy that pulls pranks. He's the Senate Majority Leader. So things are moving in ways, and that I think concludes my little tutorial, other than to say there are more congressional hearings on the books. There are going to be hearings in the House and the Senate in the US, and to the best of my knowledge, in Canada you too have some form of hearings coming up. I'm not as detailed on those, but I do know that that's happening. People all over the world are starting to say to their representatives, why don't you bring us in on the loop? I wish I could tell you what's really going on, but this is all I can tell you. At least some UFOs are from someplace that isn't here, and they're being piloted by somebody that isn't us. Now, I'm not saying that's a good place to end, but that is a great place to start. Because if that's a true statement that I put here, it doesn't mean that every crank photo and mistaken observation has to be proven true. It doesn't. It really just takes one. If you have one good case that you say, wow, that wasn't made here, that's non-human technology, it kind of opens up the door. So I just submit this for your approval. Some UFOs, not all, maybe not even a majority, but there are hundreds and thousands of unresolved cases. Some of them didn't come from here. Now they may be from Earth, I don't know, but they're not from Earth as we understand it. There's something going on that we do not yet understand. Or, if we do understand it, the people who understand it aren't sharing it with me. Otherwise, I would share it with you. So, we're kind of being kept in the dark. A new way to talk about it. But when you get into the alternate scenarios, my mind boggles. I've seen people think they're drones from us. They're drones from China or Russia. They're ultra-dimensional. A lot of people think they're demons. There are a lot of people who are evangelicals, for example, who know a lot about UFOs and think they're demons. They might be time travelers. A lot of people think that. Or they're artificial intelligence gone awry. Or they're from the Earth, a part of the Earth we don't know where it is, or just some form of unknown reality to be announced later. One of my favorite phrases is from a physicist, H.S. Haldane, who at the turn of the last century said, the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. Because people, we want to know, what do we know and what don't we know? Well, we know we don't know a lot, right? But we know something. We know that we don't know much about them. But we know that if they have been here, as long as it appears they've been here, they must by now know everything about us. Because they have the technology to access our entire internet, every library that's ever been created, every text message that's being sent today and has been sent since the dawn of technology. They have everything. They know who we are. But we don't know who they are. This is not a good situation. And that would be this. And I'm sorry for the American flag, it's just the graphic I had. I know it's inappropriate for this group, but humans and others, I call them the others, agree on one thing. What is the one thing that we all agree on? I think it's this: secrecy. The reason I think we agree on it is the others could, in fact, blow up the White House. They could, in fact, land in Central Park. They could, in fact, take over the airwaves. They could do any of these things. They have the technology. They could do anything. They could announce their presence right now. Right now. But they don't. In fact, the things they do are curious and strange and odd and weird, but they don't announce their presence to everybody. And for those of you who know anything about this, that was a big deal. That was the 1-hour interview that News Nation did to kind of break the whole thing. And Dave Grush, you know, he's in a t-shirt and some cargo shorts and seems like a perfectly nice guy. And I'm enjoying hearing him talk, and he's saying some radical things even over lunch. And by the way, just so you know, Calabasas is Kardashian adjacent. You know, Kardashians live over the hill. So I was thinking, maybe we'll see them, that'll be fun. And then everybody says, well, you know, then the conversation turned a little dark because there was a concern that we would be arrested when we showed up to record this. Real reason, I mean, to think that Grush, I mean, he had some issues getting approved to say this. And so we're all kind of thinking to ourselves, wow, well, Dave could get arrested, and I'm thinking, yeah, well, I could get arrested. My wife is in surgery, by the way, on a knee operation. That's where I'm supposed to be, but instead I'm in Calabasas. We'll talk to her about that later. And then everybody says, well, you know, we need to do a safety interview. We need to record something with Grush right now, just in case, because part of the feeling was Grush himself could get scared. And if somebody threatened him in his hotel that night, he might not show up. So the idea was we had to get a camera crew, we had to shoot something right away, and then of course everyone looks at me, because Ross is from Australia, and Grush is from, I think he was flying in from Tennessee or something, and they all go, I don't know where to get a crew. You're the Hollywood guy, get a crew. And I didn't really have any great ideas, but my son, Jared, is a filmmaker, and had just done his first film, so I call up Jared and say, hey, Jared, can you come over and record an interview right now? Like, right now? And he goes, gee, you know, Dad, I'm really kind of busy. And I said, I'll give you $500. He says, I'll be right over. Which sums up, I guess, my parenting style and my way to take on the UFO topic. So he comes over, and we record that interview with Grush. And then the next day, we record the real interview, the one that came out on News Nation, and really did, I think, change the world. Because, I mean, here's a guy that was specific enough to say something like, oh, there was a crash in Italy in 1933, and the Italians had the craft, and then the Americans, when they were fighting their way up the Italian peninsula, took it. It's very specific stuff. You know, and Dave Grush does not look like a guy that's pulling your leg about things. I mean, he is exactly who he says he is. He was a highly classified intelligence agent. He did his work. He talked to all these people who were equally classified. So, and then he's laying out crashes. And you know, the thing for me, my memory will always be sort of sitting, while Jared is doing the lighting, sitting in a, you know, in my living room with Dave Grush in his cargo shorts, drinking Diet Coke, and hearing him talk to me about crash wreckage. Because it just struck that, you know, this ain't Kansas anymore. And we're moving forward. So, Mark, can you tell me how much time I have? Okay, I'm just going to plow ahead. Stand up and wave your arms wildly. I should stop. But I would not get by if I didn't show you my wife, Jackie, because she is the greatest influence on me, because not only have we been married for 40 years, we have won a Writers Guild Award for writing a miniseries called Pandemic. We have a movie coming out, or shooting next year with Liev Schreiber as the lead, called He's the most controversial guy in ufology. Some people love him, some people hate him, some people say that he's just a disinformation agent. He's a government intelligence guy and he's just calling us. So Ross and I interviewed him last week for Need to Know. And he'd already, because this book is out, he'd already talked to, you know, I think he had done 80 interviews at that time. So it wasn't like we were going to get something radically new unless we tried to get it. So I asked him about 3 things, and I tried to hold his feet to the fire, and I don't know if we're going to have time to hear all 3 answers, but I asked him about abductions, I asked him about Roswell, and I asked him about Majestic 12. And rather than quote him, this is Lou Elizondo talking about Roswell last week. Have said in your book and in some of these interviews that's very nuts and bolts is you've casually stated that Roswell happened and that it was NHI. I mean, you haven't been hiding that. You've actually said it. So just so I'm hearing this straight up, because Roswell's been something I've been looking into for a long time, are we finally getting to the place where we're going to admit that Roswell was a crash of an exotic technology that included bodies of potential NHI, and that this has been something the government has had in its possession going back now?
So I will answer your question with a statement. I have been approved by the Pentagon to talk about this particular aspect. I will say that there was a point in time where I was told to my face, verbatim, I am not allowed to talk about crash retrievals at all, or I will absolutely go to jail. And I honored that. And that's why my book went through the adoption process, because I wanted to make sure before I talked about it, I had approval from the Pentagon to do it. It took almost a year to go through the Pentagon process, but they approved me talking about Roswell. And so that's why I can talk about Roswell. Yes, Roswell, by all accounts, was a crash. It was not a balloon. It was not test dummies being thrown out. It was a crash. And that biological samples were, non-human biological samples were recovered. This is the end of the 1940s. Lou Elizondo wasn't alive then, but there were people and there were reports that were generated as a result of that event that colleagues of mine had access to.
So Betty and Barney Hill incident. And I put this slide in there because particularly now, we have to apply the same investigative thoughtfulness to these past stories that we're putting to the present stories. This is a highway marker in New Hampshire about Betty and Barney, and as part of it, it says, they were not public with their story until it was leaked in the Boston Traveler in 1965. Well, that's not true. They were public with their story. They didn't mean to be, but they sat in a church with 2.5 times as many people who are in this room and told their story. Post to my audience every morning, and people couldn't get enough of it. So I became convinced at that time that not only was there something to it, because you have to believe Travis, at least partially. He's got 6 other witnesses who saw him disappear, and they took lie detector tests, as did he. It's a complex story, and Jen knows very much about it. She did a documentary about it. But generally speaking, while you can argue about the truth of the matter and all that, probably happened to the guy. And probably happened to Betty and Barney. And if that's happening, I wish I could show you these things. I'm going to tell you what Lou said, and then I'm going to say goodnight. Said on the subject of abductions, words to the effect, and by the way, you can go see this all for yourself. We have a YouTube channel called Need to Know. And there's other Need to Knows, but the only one with my ugly face and Coulthard's ugly face on it is the one you're looking for, and that's on YouTube. But Elizondo said, if my daughter got in an Uber and the driver touched her and then took her to the wrong address, I would have a problem with that. So his take is, unless I know more about what abductions are all about, on one level, I'm not down with it. I find that, somebody is not telling us everything we need to know about it. He said it in other ways that he believes there's something to the abduction thing and that he's concerned about it. So that was his take on abductions. We know that he said Roswell was real. I asked him about Majestic 12, and what he said about Majestic 12 is, I'm aware of Majestic 12, which is not a confirmation or denial, but he did say there was a cabal, so perhaps by another name, that has been investigating this all these years, and his phrase about it was concerning and disturbing, and implied that murders have been committed in the cause of keeping this secret a secret.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I want to say, yes, Martin did the introduction, but he'd been a supporter for a long time on my work and on the case, right? And I've always said, you know, the work had to be done and it continues to be done. But the strength is in the case. You know, it merited it. I was just lucky enough to live in there and have a little inside knowledge, right? It's been a long time and I've been looking forward to it because I am not going to do as such the Shag Harbour incident or the Shag Harbour incident, but we'll be talking about both and a lot more. And we're also going to be talking about me. And I think we're actually going to do some ufology right here, my style. And you're going to help me with it. And you'll see what I mean. And hopefully it'll give you some ideas that might work for some of you. And another, he said, he was actually on both missions. I'm saying, okay, who's the most likely to talk? So I called the most likely, and the most likely did talk. We talked on the phone at first. And I think it was a Tuesday before the Good Friday, and I made the arrangement to come to his home and to sit down and go about things the way I hoped. And he seemed quite friendly. He actually remembered my father during his brief naval career. My father served as a medic on HMCS Cape Scott at the time when they met. That was all good, and then I remember at the end of the conversation, he said, well, I got a business to run. You know, I got a little cleaning business, I got a contract with NASCAD in downtown Halifax. You know, I said, any chance I could come by? Yeah, sure, you know, and how about Good Friday, the holiday, works for me. And I went out, and he said, maybe I should run this by Maritime Command. I've always been a bit of a rebel, but you know, I do get a pension. You know, he says, I'm on my second marriage, and the wife, she's never even heard of this, you know. And I advised him not to contact Maritime Command, but he did. And when I went to the home, well, he met me at the door, and I opened the door, and I knew right away it was trouble, and he's like, yeah, he says, I suppose I should have called, but no, I wanted to say it to your face, because this is kind of crappy, but I did call Maritime Command, and I think I got to pull the plug. I do get a pension, and I get a, you know, and they told me not to talk to you. And I said, well, I said, it must have been hard for a self-described rebel to have the government tell him what not to do now. I said, isn't that why you guys went to war and all this, you know? And yeah, he said, that's fair, but I'm very sorry. And he tried to close the door, and the wife came from behind him and pushed him aside and said, I almost used his real name, because that is a pseudonym which I've agreed to, because with Don Ledger, wasn't my own. Sorry, Don. Harry, as he's called in the book, the wife pushed Harry aside and said, come on, I made coffee and sausages. I was listening in on the other phone. I've been wanting to hear this all week, let them in. Thank God. That got in the door. He just looked defeated. So I got in. The first thing I did was I called this one of my techniques, dancing as fast as I can. So I started talking naval jargon and lore. So next thing you know, the conversation's flowing good, and a half hour into it, after coffee and sandwiches, I take a little tape recorder like Phil Class, a skeptic used to carry around, I take the back off, let the batteries fall on the floor, and say, okay, Harry, we're just talking. Tell me, like, because I need to hear this story. And he tells me all about Shelburne. And it's very clear this is the very first detailed telling. Although the chief, Guy Fenn, had told me, you know, that it was a separate thing. To me, it was like, no, it wasn't like Shag Harbour, it was back around the Cuban Missile Crisis. 62, October 6th, but in actual fact, as we know nowadays, it's October 60. But anyway, those first impressions, that's another thing I've learned over the years. When you ask a question quick and you're not ready, go with that first answer. That's come true so many times for me. So he tells a story, and you know, as you're getting minutes into it and we're getting to the gory details of it, he seems emotionally just overwrought. And you're like, whoa, you know, when you think about the things we talked about earlier, hauling your dead friends out, some of this stuff, it left an impression on me, and I thought, well, we're into the hot stuff here now, you know. And some of the questions I asked, I was pushing buttons a little bit. I can picture him sitting in the chair, and bent over, looked at the kitchen floor, and he put his hand and says, you just gotta move on, I can't talk. Like I said, consider the stuff they're training in their careers, take these things. It made a big impression on me. So by the close of that evening's interviews, I've got a list. And when we went to leave, he told me, look, I wish you all the best. I mean it. He said, please don't come back. Please don't call again. And I thanked him. I said, I get it. I appreciate it. And I left. Man, that was great. Holy cow. He says, you know, that's the real deal. And I said, yeah. I said, this is already starting to feel to me what happened with Stan. You know, we're going to have 3 locations. We're going to have, you know, all these things. I said, you know, and we're talking bodies and in the water and aliens. I said, I don't know. You know, I was going to have this nice, neat, little, sexy crash scenario, and you know, no one was going to explain it away and have government documents, and I wasn't ready. Well, Bob laughed at me, a belly laugh. He looked, he said, man, you are hard to please. You're what? So I drove Bob home. He says, where do you take me? I said, you're going home. Oh, come on. He says, I want to hear that. No, I said, you're going home. And I got him out, and I called Toronto right away, and got the guy on the phone who I had been told shot the underwater film footage of this event in Shag Harbour. And I get him on the phone, and he's not quite as open as Harry was. And I go, yes, is this Wade? Again, the pseudonym. But he says, yes. I told him I was talking to your friend, and he was talking about, you know, what you guys experienced on a NATO mission with, he says, at least a dozen U.S. warships and a dozen Canadian. Slight exaggeration on those numbers, as I found out. But essentially, it was a, you know, he didn't name the mission. He didn't say what it was exactly when I quizzed him as to, what are you doing? What was the purpose? Why were you splashed around the water at Shelburne? And he was like, oh, they had us frigging around with some, you know, proximity mines, you know, he didn't make it like that's the main purpose of the mission. And of course, you know, the questions were focused on the unusual, unconventional extraterrestrial, potentially extraterrestrial nature of it. But that was said once, because remember, I didn't record it, but as soon as I got in the car, before I drove off home, I actually pulled over and made notes from memory as quick as I could. My memory is pretty good, and some people here will know that. You know, I used to be able to quote pages of text from some of the books, even the Boring Condon report. And first responses, we can't talk about that. Oh, I said, your friend had all kinds to say. Let me read you. He said, whatever he said, you can take it to the bank. It's gospel. I'll let you go. I said, don't hang up. You'll be regretting it, because you better hear what he said before you put your good housekeeping stamp of, you know, of approval on it. So he listened to everything he said, and I said, do you have any problem with that? Please don't call again. It's fine. Don't call. And he hung up. Believe it or not, some years ago, and that's the other thing about this. Okay, picture this. He had a name pin on it, and I'm coming close to saying the name. And it was there, but part of the second name was smudged out, and in my mind I go, no, Chris, don't even go there. Don't even go there. And we're about to leave on this job. And he says, you ready? We're good? Let's go. I said, we'll do the job. We're out of here. And we pull out, and he puts on the ball cap, and it says Fleet Diving Unit. And I rattle off his two Christian names and his surname. And he looks at me, and he's like, yeah. And I said, you served in the Navy, and I named all the ships, and, you know, because I'd researched this guy. The first thing I did, by the way, was just go to the Halifax Main Branch Library, haul out one of those big ugly orange books from the year, Mike City Directory. And I said, no, my name's Chris. And he says, what, Chris? I said, I'm that Chris. And the vehicle comes to a stop. He goes, whoa. He turns white as a sheet, looks at me, he goes, we can't talk about that. I said, you know, I'll be honest, I thought you'd be in an old hotel by now or dead. He said, you're killing me, man. back to work the next day, he quit. I do feel a little guilty about that, but his wife wanted him to quit anyway, he told me. So, you know, those things you don't put in the book, but there's something up off the bottom, something to crash. Once he said we found a U-2, we had to snap the wings off it with a cutting torch, and I'm like, yeah. He said, well, that was my specialty in the Air Force, was ident, you know, finding crash wreckage, debris, this sort of thing. I said, well, what did you see? He goes, whoa, whoa, big fella, don't get excited. He said, I didn't see anything. He said, let me tell you about it. He's been in a hammock in those days, some guy's socks hanging in your face. I hate it. I've never made a sailor, Chris, he said. But he said, that was the most screwball mission. I was out there for a week, those ships never moved. He said it was the ugliest atmosphere. There were Americans all over the place coming aboard. And he said, they never showed me anything. They never briefed me. They told me they were done with me and sent me home. Never showed me a thing. That we're sitting over aliens on the bottom of 2 flying saucers. He said, and they sounded real serious because I was just shrugging it off the first few days. But then the Americans come aboard, a big admiral. He said he had a protocol officer with him in the Whites, and he was upstairs meeting with, he said, what was that admiral they had back then? The guy who took American orders during the Cuban Missile Crisis, disobeyed the Prime Minister. And of course I knew because I was getting to know all the names from the research, you know, and I said, Rear Admiral Ken Dyer. Him, he said. They flew him up to the ship. He meets with the Americans. He goes, they called it a hot wash-up meeting or something. And they're upstairs. The protocol officer is wandering around. Now, he says, we worked pretty close back then. He goes, the Navy guys, he goes, they were pretty good to the Americans, to the enlisted men, because they like working with them. They love being able to give them beer. And what happens, he said, is that, you know, when an officer comes down low, he goes, you could just hear the lull come over the room. We didn't like the guys in the uniforms, they called them fish heads. So this guy comes down, the white, how are you, wandering around. He walks over to the divers and he leans in and says, hey, you guys shouldn't be talking shop today like this. He says, on such a nice day. And he said, you shouldn't be talking about that Russian sub we're sitting over. And instantly, Harry jumps up, the table flips over, and he grabs the American officer by the uniform and won't let go. And he said, with you Yankee boys. And this is the version I'm hearing, which matched all these years later with what he goes, because man, he goes, you know, when he first said, you need to talk to Harry, Jim didn't know I already had. And he told me the same story. He says, man, I thought he'd never get under the bird. He grabbed this guy, and he says he wouldn't let go right away. His boys around him said they're trying to separate them, and they're hollering at him, you know, because they know he's in real trouble now, right? And he said, that's the trouble with you Yankee boys. He said, you see the red menace anywhere. The trouble is this red menace, he goes, it's not from the Black Sea or the Caspian. It's not from Moscow. Could be Mars. Probably a lot farther out, he said. Thing sure, if that thing down there wanted to do something to us, there's nothing you could do about it. He said, so when we sail away, I hope you guys don't come back and try to go old John Wayne on it. Well, when they finally separate them, the protocol officer runs upstairs, comes back with the captain of the ship, you know, right away, but he's gone, right? It was the commanding officer of Canadian Forces stationed Barrington at Back Row, this end of the Pine Tree Line. People always hear about the Dew Line, but there's a new Canada line and the Pine Tree Line for NORAD. He was the CO of the base there when it was manned. At the time, he had retired and was dying of prostate cancer. And I talked to him into having me and Don wanted to come along to go to his home to talk about, actually not about Shag Harbour, but a UFO incident in Shag Harbour that also involved the base 3 years later in 1970. So we went up for that interview, and this guy was very gracious and very helpful and very open. And it was going good, and I can remember Don was ecstatic. And this guy was really gracious and a real gentleman. We're having a good time. We get to that coffee and sandwiches step where the wife's going, and she hollers for Calvin to come out and help her bring it in the room for us, right? And we reached a point where, you know, at this point, Don was convinced that we're all others. the Shelburne was part of the grand finale of Shag Harbour. In the room, I turned to Don and I go, would you be okay if we got thrown out? And he goes, no, what are you going to do now? I said, I just got a question, but we might get thrown out. Are you okay? This was such a lovely evening, I thought I'd ask him. Yeah, if you must, he goes. I said, I'm serious, we might get thrown out. So Rustin comes back in and the wife and they give us this stuff. We're going back to talking about the Smith Brothers 1970 case. And suddenly I popped a question. I said, you know, at the Shelburne base there used to be a weapons tech there. I talked to him and he told me that you gave him a briefing one time about the Shelburne incident that happened a long time ago, I believe before Shag Harbour, but I'm not sure of the date. And that you said, and he described basically that there were aliens in the water, according to this briefing, this weapons tech, for by the way, nuclear weapons they weren't supposed to have stored there. So I asked this, and suddenly everything's silent, you get sucked the air out of the room, and Rustin's standing there as I'm standing out, and I feel a little guilty, and I'm like, uh-oh, here it comes. And the man closes his eyes and he takes a deep breath, and I thought, here it comes. And he looks at me and he goes, Chris, never ask me that again. And you can, if I went into the whole story about the Smith Brothers case and how they used to abscond civilian investigations in the valleys and all kinds of the other things he'd been open about, there's something to the Shelburne story. It was many, many things like that over the year, okay? Well, I would tell that to Stanton, and I would tell him about some of the sightings we had here and incidents and what happened with me and Don one night on Highway 3. And I remember Stanton looking at me and he took a deep breath and said, Chris, you're a ufologist now, thou shalt not see things. Wow, I'm a big fan of yours, and I'd like to buy your files. Well, I said, you probably don't have to. They're probably free, except for postage and whatever. I got most of them through, well, as Dennis and yes, giggled, because through National Archives, the Director of History, St. Mary's University, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, you don't understand. I'm going to buy your files, all of them. And I thought, oh God, a nut job, And yes, and well, I said, that doesn't sound like any fun. I said, what kind of money were you talking, boy? And he's like, well, not what they paid you at Fox. I said, oh, I didn't work for Fox. At Broadcasting Fox, I was paid by Paramount. Checking his research. I said, your research isn't that good. What did they pay? He says, $2,000, $3,000, something like that. And I said, would you tell a voice on the phone what you got paid? Well, he says, I'm talking more real money. He says, like, if you just want to hand it over and quit, he says, like, $50K, would that do it? I said, you almost sound, said, oh, I'm serious. He says, I'm going to give you a list of phone numbers. Think about it over tonight. Yeah. And I looked at his name, and I've never heard of him. I said, do you have a work number? Yeah, there's my cell number. Here's my home number. Here's my work number. Here's my car phone. Here's... And when I looked at the work number, I thought, that's an Ottawa number. I said, where do you work? Well, just in Ottawa. I've been in government positions. It's got nothing to do with this is me as an individual, he says. Okay, so he gives me the number. I called the work number. Office of Paul Zett. Liberal member at the time for, what was that riding? A New Brunswick people, I think St. John funding. Paul Zett. And I said, would the guy who called me again, oh yes, he's no, he's out right now. I said, tell him Chris Dobb called. All of a sudden the phone picked up. Yeah, so are we going to do business? We. I thought this was you. Yeah, I meant off. I said, well, now I'm hearing we. This has nothing to do with Paul Zett. So then who is we? Look, He says, you should come up here. I can bring you up here and we'll talk about it. He said, you need to think about this. I said, it doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. I said, I don't think I'm interested. I said, right now, $50,000 would change my life, but you know what? Goodbye. And he kept calling back and leaving other numbers and sending letters, and yeah. So, what was that? Was that the hand of government? Was that an overzealous individual? I don't think it was a nutcase, because he actually ran the office with Paul, this guy, as I found out. I would be doing this, whether as an individual or as an agent potentially of the government, if I speculate there. Because there's nothing in Shag Harbour that was that sensitive. All the files from the beginning are unrestricted. And at the time, I could never figure it out, and I gave it way too much thought off and on in a dull moment, on a flight, on a bus trip, in my car. But nowadays, it makes perfect sense. Shelburne. It was inevitable I would stumble upon it. And they thought, this guy stumbling around just might make the difference, you know, or unearth it. Took me 29 years from when I first began to stumble and, as I call it, dance as fast as I can. How much time I got back? You know what you got to do now? And I said, what? You got to get the film released. And I'm like, well, of course. No, seriously, man, you can do it. Like, you got to get the film done. Yeah, I'll just send off an access to information request to Library and Archives Canada. Now, I want a show of hands. How many people here think that if I put in an access request to Ottawa and ask for that I'm going to get it? I don't have to look, do I? Why? I'll tell you. A couple of reasons probably. One, they never had it. Who would give that to them? But second of all, if you had it, something hot like that, you wouldn't dare let it out. My God, there'd be bedlam. People would be running amok in the streets. The world's end would be near, right? No. But, in fact, I rarely do an access to information request. I sometimes do. There's reasons for it, there's reasons not to do it. Often I do them informal. Why would you do that? I'm going to really get the camera guys upset here, I think. Gotta sit down for a minute. Here's the thing. If you make a formal access to information request, and you say you're a new MUFON member, you don't have a lot of experience, right? And they know that. And you ask for something, and you get a response to it. Oh, we searched for this period of time, and we did this, and we did that, and we could not find anything with the information provided. Typically, that person accepts that. The thing is, what will happen is, you know, they may have some indications that it might be there, but they're not going to tell you that there's a time limit, you ran out the clock, and that there are other options. Now, if you've done as many as me, I'm like, oh, no, I don't care if time's up. And, you know, yes, you can employ the Information Commission of Canada. You can claim things like they didn't serve or poor service. Under the Act, they're supposed to respond in 30 days. You can request a 15-day extension. But let me tell you how one thing, when I have to provide an escort, and there are rules to it. And, you know, I've heard about this when I looked into Shag Harbour and the many other cases where something came down to the earth, whether it was debris or the kind of cases Chris was talking about. And I thought, well, what is this policy? And you write to the RCMP headquarters and they go, we don't know what you're talking about. The retired guys all say, well, we call Halifax. We weren't trained in it. We didn't have a booklet. We call Oxford Street in Halifax and they tell us what the rules are. And the rules are about who's in charge on the scene. Well, it's Canadian Armed Forces once they arrive, but if an American bona fide agency, which it says comes up and demands an RCMP escort into some town in Newfoundland or Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia, they are to get.
I'll tell you when we get there, on our left, there's a building, there's an insurance place and a hairdressing shop. That was the police station at the time, and that's where we made the phone call to. That's where the police officer lived that got the phone call that night. It's just here, and I'll tell you when we go by which building it is. That building in there, that's where Corporal Ricky lived at the time. That was the police office and his house at the same time.
That's off to the right?
That one off to the left, right there.
Right there.
That's
Looks
where
like
the
an
police officer come
RCMP.
from that night. That was the hit guy.
Looks like an RCMP.
The hit there. That's the parking lot. Me and the guy that owned the car was sitting in, and across the street where the theater was. And the three girls that we knew we would go to school with come from out of that building there. It's a piece to the light now. And we were sitting in this building here on the right, in that parking lot, and they wanted to know we'd give them a ride home. So that's the only reason why we ended up in Wizarda that night. So we get ahead here where these stop lights are, or street lights are. If you go on across here on the Cape Island, that's where Ron Pond, the Downey was when he see it go down that night. He was on south side on this island, but you see the lights and he just see it going down, and that's what he called in and reported a plane crash also.
So none of these buildings were here, right?
No, the Irving graduates probably here, but none of them was. Yeah, they may have been a restaurant at the time. But that's been the only building. The other ones was not there. Meet and greet Friday night when they showed the video there, when Normie Smith was on talking, telling about what he seen. It's just there on the road, where he was at in the road. I'll tell you when we get there. And his and David's stories are on the wall in the museum if you want to read them. But when we get there in another minute or so, I'll tell you where they was when they see the lights going down. That's this church. Is where we was when we see the lights in the sky, and there's in here to our right, and over here. So that's where we see the lights.
Cool.
That night, and there was 4 of them. One would come on, 2, 3, 4, then be on for a second, and they would all go out, and they would start on in that sequence again, and they was going along here no faster than what we was in 45 or 50 mile an hour. And now you probably wouldn't even see the lights, because back then everybody burnt wood in most of these trees, especially in places that you're going to go are so high that you wouldn't see it today what we see that night. So that's all we done. We just see lights flashing as we were driving along here, and everybody thought it was an airplane. See that high hill there? We lost sight of it. As we hit there a little bit, we lost sight of it, and we come out the other side of it, so that shows you how high it was, that it was behind that, so we lost it. So it really wasn't that high in the sky. Like I said, probably when we got here, we lost sight of it. We got here the other side of it, you can see the lights again. Probably when we got here, we could see the lights again. The same thing when we get up where the school is here now. There's a big hill there, and I think we lost sight of it there for a couple of seconds. But here as we were driving along, and it was still going level. I'll tell you roughly where we was when it started going down.
On the right-hand side, right?
Yes. Yeah, these trees weren't there. You can see perfect.
Yes, here.
You can still see it going. And we got that right here where it started going down, from level to going down, and we lost sight of it behind this hill. And like I said, 1 or 2 seconds, we made the top of the hill. We could see the light in the water, and if you see where that flagpole is up there, that's roughly where it was offshore there. And I see the Coast Guard's here early. I told them 10 o'clock, but anyhow.
Well, there's 10, it's fine about.
Yeah, well, I did make sure the bus is here before you got there. But anyhow, you see it in the water, and there was only one light. And we got there, and this house wasn't here at the time. There was nothing here, so we just kept going and went to the phone booth and called the RCMP and reported a plane crash.
So there's going to be a spot up here, Phil.
Where that big building is, there's a green store here. I guess it's green. Was that? And the phone booth used to be right on this corner of this building here, right on the cement. The phone booth back then was right there at that building. So, anyhow, that's where we come and turned around there and went back. So anyhow, he's just going to go up here to this grass, or he can turn there if he wants to.
Whereabouts?
You go up the gas station just around the corner, probably.
You've got a
Anyhow, we
case,
just
right?
got in the car and went back down here to what they call the moth plant with them. We went to meet the cops. And it ain't gonna be what we call a crash site today, so that's the parking lot down. That's the only place there was to park back then, so there was a moth plant down, a big parking lot, so that's where everybody went. That's where the cops showed up, Normie and his father come, and there's about 40 or 50 people out and see the look, watch the light in the water as it drifted down by. So anyhow, I'll tell you more of that when we get down there. The water where it started from, probably 500 yards, 300 yards from shore here, so.
And it drifted, right, Laurie?
Yeah, and then it drifted down with the tide, so. About 300 yards from shore, so maybe the Coast Guard seeing us. I told him when we got here with the box to go up and turn around roughly, he knew where that. Well, we see it in the water, and then he was going to go down by here about 200 or 300 yards from shore, about how far it drifted. Whenever.
Whenever? Alright. You want to get on a boat with these things? Nobody did come No, we don't expect it to happen today. Maybe next time.
Yeah. About 300 yards from shore.
I think at this point.
Trying to see this number on the front of that boat, maybe by some email. I just wonder what it's at.
I'd say they put it on the boat in the water, maybe.
Back and the car is approaching us in the distance, and we're like, is that Laurie? And he happens upon us, hops out.
Wow, just by accident.
Small town, I guess, yeah.
So you pointed it out, yeah, that's fantastic. Wow. Wow. Oh, he's coming over in a little.
Does that track with any other, the idea of the foam? Is that the other sightings?
So this crop is planted or spreads.
Versions of what happened that evening, but I'll turn this over to Laurie.
The Coast Guard's going to go up roughly where we see it in the water that night, and then turn around and go down by about 300 yards from shore, and that's where it drifted that night, as it went down by here. I'll give you some idea roughly how far away it was. Got no idea. The lights look like be 20 feet apart, we're only guessing they could have been 40. But if they're 20 feet apart, they're 4 months, they can be small.
Pass right in front of you.
Yeah. That's where we see the water first up there, roughly where he is. Probably a little farther offshore. You've seen it, there's been a black object, you've seen it above the water. We never see nothing but the light over the water. It was in the water. Yeah, whatever it was or something. The light probably on top, it just level with the water. That's just my.
So you didn't see any objects, any matter between the lights?
No, obviously here, there's only one
Yeah,
light.
to have a little more convenience. It's so cool to see that piece.
You never get anything. Yeah. There you go. You couldn't have asked for a better day.
Once knowing that
Shelley made it, but I didn't realize you made them.
No, it was the one that says post for the season.
Oh, okay. Well,
I gave her
hard to tell where.
the
Well.
Yeah, FO. Well, I know.
And don't mind me because I'm kind of nervous speaking in front of you.
You're fabulous.
Thank you. But anyway, I was going to come here today, and I was going to talk about this here in my sighting in 2017 to the Cape, and it was with my husband. But I've decided since then that I should start from the beginning, because everybody should start from the beginning and understand how relevant that is in your life now. And it sure played a relevance in my life. My name is HendrixJHE. I am an abductee. When I was 5 years old, I played outside with everybody my age. Everybody played outdoors then. They used their imagination. We played in the woods. So in our little village, we all made, camps and things like that in the woods. And I ended up going across the road towards the shore one day, and I got lost. So at being 5 and being by myself, I sat down on a little log by a little stream. And I sort of put my hands down in my face because I was crying, I was scared. As I looked up, I seen two beings. And it sort of took me by surprise, these two beings. And at the time, I thought I was being led to a camp. But, obviously, I was being led to a UFO that had stationed itself on the ground near the shoreline. I didn't realize this until Chris managed to get me into some regression to find out it wasn't people leading me to a camp, it was people leading me to a UFO. I was led there, and I got in the UFO, and the only reason I know what I know is because I've been regressed. I always thought it was just going to a camp. So I ended up getting in this UFO. In the room there were kids. There were about 10 children. So therefore I know that it wasn't just me. There's a lot of kids being taken by UFOs. So as I got in there, I could see that they were observing the children in the room. And then they came and got me. So this was around, I'd say 12:30, I left the house that day. And so they come and got me, and they brought me to a different room. And in that room, I seen a strange being, and the strange being was a reptilian. But it wasn't a full-grown reptilian, it was a smaller reptilian being. And I could feel the emotions of this reptilian, and didn't speak no words, but you can feel the emotions of this being. And I was kind of uncanny, because who does this? So regression brought that out, and I went over to the being and I sympathized with this being. I didn't understand why it was so sad. You could feel the emotion through this being. And I comforted the being, and I was being observed, also comforting this being. So next thing I know, and this is the only case that I don't have a witness. The rest I have witnesses. But the next thing I know, I'm being escorted off of the ship, brought out towards the edge of the woods where I was lost, and I was waving to these my friends. I call them my friends. And the next thing I know, I hear my mother hollering to me because she'd been yelling all day, scared for where I was. So I wave back to the beings. I go home. So this started off my life with UFOs. But I always wondered in the back of my mind, is this real? Like, am I just imagining things? So last year confirmed a lot for me, believe it or not. One night, October the 23rd, I seen this vibrant, pulsing orb up in the sky. And it came close, and it went far away. And I mean, it was beautiful, turning all kinds of colors. Not that it meant anything at the time, but the next day I would find out what. So the next day, I go in the living room doing my normal stuff, and then all of a sudden, knock, knock on the door. Who's this? I didn't know if it was, Jehovah's Witnesses, how you don't know what they're going to do. And anyway, I don't mean to offend anyone. But anyway, I went to the door, and this lady was standing there, someone I didn't recognize. So she said, my mother used to live in this house. I said, she did? Well, she's out in the car, and she come the whole way from Ontario. And she was born in this house, and she was brought up in this house, and she was wondering if she could come in your house and look around. I said, sure. She's more than welcome to come look around. And I mean, myself, I was born in the same house. So back then, you were born in houses. So anyway, she comes, and she gets in the door, and she comes up with her cane. So she looks around, and she looks and says, oh, she said, that's changed. And she looked around some more, and she said, oh, that's changed. So she gets around, she's, 84 years old. So she gets around, and she goes to the living room, and it's at my coffee table. And on my coffee table, I have this book here, which shows a picture of the gray Inhuman. And she looked at the book, and she put her hands to her face like this. She said, oh my God. I said, I know, I'm embarrassed. I do believe in UFOs, and I believe I've been abducted, because, she's probably thinking I'm crazy. Anyway, so she said, no. She said, it happened to you too. I said, what? She said, it happened to me. I said, where did you see these grays? She said, across the road, down by the shore. Just the exact spot that had happened to me. So this obviously had happened before. So that alone gave me confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. Even though all my life you're ridiculed. I was born into a Christian background, a Christian family. I'm a nurse by trade. I retired. But to know that this lady, 84 years old, had already gone through the same thing with the same beings, give me verification that I needed and acquired all my life. So maybe I should have talked about this night at the Cape, because they show themselves to me. I've been able to take pictures since 2015. See, and this here, I'll just give you a little tidbit of information. This was one solid object that created a porthole, and it turned into a starburst, and it turned into some sort of I don't know, it looks like a wheel within the wheel. And then it turned into the boomerang UFO. So this was above Cape Island, or Cape Sable Island. And this is just one of the times, like I've had experiences all my life. But I did want you to know where I came from. We all have to start somewhere. And last year when I talked about my story, it was my 15-year-old story. But I thought that I'd catch up by going back, because the relevance of this lady coming last year was very instrumental to me. And to know that I'm not crazy, that it has been happening. I do have an artifact in my lower tailbone, or scoop mark, and they took a big chunk out of my tailbone. And I also have an artifact inside my body. It's an air-filled sac with an artifact in it. It's by my coccyx. So a lot of people say, why aren't you going to take that out? I've been through too much. I've had open heart surgery. I've had my appendix out. So much scar tissue now. I wouldn't take it out, but there's something telling me not to. So I'm donating it to MUFON. So MUFON will get my thing after I'm done on this earth. So I just want to thank you very much for coming today. And if you have any questions, I'm open for questions. And my CT scan, if anybody wants to take a picture of my CT scan, that shows the artifact is in this booklet. You might have to open it up, Jennifer, if you would. I'm willing to share. This has to get out. We have to help people that's going to the same thing.
Thank you. It's empty, so thank you. So I went back and explained to her what I was doing, and I was taking some pictures. Yeah, and well, so what she said to me was, you know, it's so interesting you're telling me the story, because shortly after I bought the house, somebody banged on the door and said, a craft just landed in the field up behind you. Can I run up in your field and look at it? Yeah, it was like, isn't that interesting? You can't make this shit up.
You can't. And like the pictures, I mean, how can I get pictures? How can I get films and things like that? So much. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. The more the merrier. And I really appreciate you, Jennifer, helping me out. Because I'm nervous, you know. He pulls up this phone and he shows me a picture, and it's a picture of a tunnel that goes out, I think, about 14 miles, but it could be longer. It could be upwards of 30 miles. I'm not clear. We'll have to ask him about that. And these were tunnels that those listening devices were then attached to at the end of the tunnel. So there are 2 or 3 of them that go out about at least 14 to 30 miles from the military base where we're going to go. So I'll pass around my phone and hopefully it'll come back to me on the bus. And you can look at these 2 pictures that are here. There's one with 2 tunnels in them, and then there's another with just 1 tunnel in them.
sensitivity, it played a part during the Mercury space program. We've often heard when the men landed, even in the movie The Right Stuff, you see on some of the missions, the trouble they had and some of the concerns and mishaps possibly, if not human error in some cases with certain apparatus, of setting off the explosive bolts that would blow the hatch when they come back down, whether it's the right place and other concerns. Interestingly, I've also seen the initial design papers for this. Are you ready for this? Were designed by Thomas Edison. And it was largely conceptual, but it went a little beyond that and showed what kind of sensitivity and how many centers you need and how many sensors. It goes back that far. But anyway, it came online as a functioning base in 55. And what they quickly realized is sometimes they were detecting things that probably weren't submarines and probably weren't large whales. To give, which we were hardwired with. That too was a U.S. base on Newfoundland, and then of course Canadian soil. Newfoundland was late to join the Federation. And what happened is they sent a small boat with some small sonar, and they believed there was an object in the bottom that was 900 feet in length and metallic and making lots of noise. And at that time, there was no such thing as the Soviet Typhoon sub, and even they aren't quite that big, right? So they came out the next day and were prepared and had some divers ready for a deep dive and all kinds of special equipment, and it was gone. That case was told to be by enough staff that, you know, it had a lot of credibility. There was a lot of other hard details. We're not going to spend any more on time. But it was quick, they realized, and there was also many cases where they called in destroyer escorts from Halifax. Ships like the Terra Nova, HMCS Chaudière was some of the ones. The men on that ship told me they lost their Christmas holiday back around 1960 or 61. They weren't sure, chasing fast sonar targets 100 miles offshore that this base was picking up. They made sonar contact. The sonar man from these ships gave me a good sit-down interview and said these things were doing over 100 knots. We had nothing to do that. Initially, they were chalking that up to the super cavitating torpedoes. The Russians had been experiencing, you know, who it was who made the claim.
Was that during the crash site that night? Is it talking about the aliens off it? Or
it was actually in the days immediately following, Jim.
Okay.
And what it was is, you know, they felt they had to close the base. And it's interesting, you know, I went through all the weekly papers and, you know, it was kept very quiet, but eventually I found names of people that made the claim and you went to them. They were certainly credible and would say, hey buddy, good luck with that, leave us out of it. We left town. You know, they sold their homes. No, it was that serious, right? And on October the 12th, shortly after noon, actually it was just before noon, they were all assembled and ready, and they proceeded extremely slow speed into the Dog Lake course to see if they're okay. A few mines are spotted on the way, notes are being made. It says course and speed variable within swept channel in the ship's log. I've been told by the divers that, you know, that within an hour or so, in their terms, all hell broke loose, the shit hit the fan, all to the surface. We encountered activity in the water, there were live beams, and 2 flying saucers sitting on the seabed. And the mission stopped 4 days without moving. Actually, to be accurate, they said a week, something like that. Turns out it was 4 days, but the mission wasn't quite over yet. There was a kerfuffle then, and then more said it was waiting. But the mission got waylaid, and in the end, the Cape Scott never did make the passage, by the way, but the Orleans Parish did. And they go, okay, the mission was a success on the surface. But anyway, on that day, so when I had that logbook and I go through what I found, is I get 60 minutes in, nothing's unusual. 12:40 p.m., shortly after lunch, October the 12th, right? Which, if I remember, was a Wednesday again. Funny how Wednesdays, October keep coming up, isn't it? We do have those things in Nova Scotia. Anyway, what happens next is, you know, they're getting some unusual readings and they're not sure what. The captain wants them to check to see some mines, if there's been contact, check these recording mines. The divers go over the side, go to the bottom. They're in 7 fathoms of water, 42 feet for landlubbers, not very deep. And they go down, and that's when they first see the UFO, UAP, whatever you want to call them, on the bottom. Their initial reaction is, what the hell is this? There's live beings in the water. They're not human. And the next one is, we think that one is lending assistance or helping the other. They have a great deal of trouble trying to convince the brass topside of what they're seeing. But once they realize they're unrelenting and take it serious, they yank them in out of the water right away. They go to emergency action stations, and as you've heard me say before, the captain of the Cape Scott declares DEFCON 1, which historically, military historians and others claim has never happened. That declaration of DEFCON 1 would apply to this geographic area.
Defense condition.
Ready to go. They don't need clearance to use weapons. It's essentially a state of war. You don't need clearance, right? They called it with Maritime Command. This does not mean the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the Pentagon raised the whole system, right? But commanders in the field in 1960, it's like those suburbs, like the one Gene Hackman was in, where, you know, they could launch nuclear missiles on their own order, right? Once they got an emergency action message, and it was interpreted, of course, in that movie. The argument is it a message or a message fragment? Does it raise that level in the field, in their geographic area? And that's what happened here. But according to historians, that has not even happened in the field, you see? So that's what's so significant. No, the Pentagon didn't have a huddle and get ready to launch the ICBMs or anything, you know. But still, this is a situation if they're wrong, they could have escalated, could have had, we don't know what kind of risk. As far as we know, none of those ships, they're not the kind that would have been carrying nukes, right? However, nukes were being stored at this base. And when you think about it, typically NATO partners, even the small nations like Sweden, they believe they had a Soviet sub in their territorial water some years ago, and they bombed the hell out of it. They just kept going at it, and they're unsure to this day whether it was destroyed or got away, or it may have been some experimental Russian sub. You know what I mean? But you don't allow an enemy vessel. And no, it was a Cold War, not a hot war, but it was one that was always threatening to heat up on a moment's notice. You would not let that sit out there. And where they were sitting, you would see from here. It was gone. And I teased and pulled it. It was like pulling teeth out of these divers, you know, and it was a fight all the way. And unlike Shag Harbour, where everything was unrestricted and open, it's just that nobody had done the footwork. In the case of Shelburne, it's still war trying to get everything. I even had a fight for that logbook, which supposedly they had no reason to hesitate on. At a time when it was typically, you were getting responses within the 30-day time frame of Canada's Access to Information Act. That took 7 months, and there was a lot of back and forth. And at one point, they threatened that if I asked or attempted anything, I would wait much longer for it. In other cases, as we know, it's the attraction of nuclear technology. And I know sometimes some people say, well, look, if these people are that advanced, these races, these other species, to come here, to travel the distance, it must involve a lot more than just have the nuclear material. Well, that may be true. But in fact, they may not have nuclear material or access. Earth and this solar system could be somewhat unique. We don't know yet whether the distribution of heavy elements is well parsed out through the universe. One of the things we do know that physicists will tell you is that everything heavier than iron, think about this, this is unusual. On the periodic table that weighs more than iron is created in the supernova. Literally stardust from distant exploding stars. So first of all, you have to be in a portion of the galaxy near where these heavy elements are produced. Yes, Mark? can you describe how they described the aliens, and did they have any breathing apparatus, or why did they call them beings? Well, I'm not sure I would trust all the details. First of all, there were very few about that. You're well into the point where, like, I'm pleading with them and trying to draw it out, and they're trying to move me on. But I believe that the consensus was, such as it was that no, there was no apparatus. And they appeared like to be small beings similar to what we now consider typical graves. But I think they're viewed through the water column, you know, underneath so shallow. There's a lot of life in the water here that time of year, visibility. If you got 10 to 20 feet, and of course a lot of that depends on whether there's been runoff the day before. You know, anyone that dives here would tell you, you know, visibility in the water to the shore, the crab shit. It could be good, it can be extremely poor here. So, you know, I'm hoping that someday, you know, if we ever see that film, if the film still exists, if I get a little bit of luck and do a whole lot of work and a few things fall into place, and it is a long shot, we may know the answer. But I think knowing the technology of the day and local conditions here, that it would not be a very impressive visual piece of film shot. With anything you could discern would say so much. It really would. And what I was starting to say earlier, before I lose this train of thought, is one of the things that impresses me. Yes, it's a very different case in Shag Harbour, and I'm often described it as a case that keeps on giving when new evidence comes up, like Pan Am 160, and the testimony of Isabel Tower, the lightkeeper's wife, is everything comes forward, it strengthens the interpretation. Nothing ever weakens it in that. Well, it's too early to Shelburne to say what the trend is. If there is a trend, so far you think about from when I first heard the story, which is now, what, 1994? What did I say it started on Good Friday, 1994? And if you go back to then to now, everything the men said in the original telling was like, oh, well, hell broke loose. Well, all hell broke loose when I found some solid evidence that something happened, bumps up to DEFCON 1. You know, all the evidence goes stronger than the men had actually put it across. And in a way, I wasn't surprised, because in the end, it comes back. You know, the great thinker Haldane once said, the universe is not made of atoms and molecules, but of stories. I often think that one of the things that served me in the field is often I'm my own skeptic, and you have to be. You know what I mean? Because you know what? I want the real answers. I don't want to kid myself. I don't want to sell it short. I want to know, right, with certainty. I don't want to find out I've been lying to myself and accepting this and rubber stamping it with a good host of keeping seal of approval that leaves me still wanting in the end. No, that's not me. So, yeah, when you look at all that, it's, but I know what I mean. I wrote a song once. I used to have a music career. And on Cape Sable Island, I saw one of what I believe to be one of the Go Path UAP along with about 60 other people in the daytime, and the sighting lasted an hour and 20 minutes. And, you know, the cliche is seeing it is believing. I'd already seen one or two UFO events in my life. I've been very lucky. I've spent a lot of time out here looking up. I've trained myself not to be like most of us do. Take your hands out of your pockets, look up. Don't look at the ground, you know? Or your phone. Or your phone. There's a world out there. And anything is possible. And on that day, let's just say, whatever lingering hope was back there has all been washed away. I hope that most of you were that lucky at some point to have such an experience. I didn't think I would be, and I think sometimes without having that real world experience, I might not have had the energy to persist. I'd actually declared that I'd given up on Shelburne before 2022 and wrote some articles about it and wished somebody who wanted to pick up the torch all the best. I actually jobbered a book for somebody who was paid cash and wrote that thing, and of course the next thing you know, the real world intervened and that happened. I had that experience and it evaluated the manuscript I'd been paid for.
Go back to my question, you don't know that anything was rendered inert here, and you didn't ever talk to anyone who knew about the nuclear weapons on site, because I would think
No,
that's
that was a well-guarded secret, yes, for sure, and that one stayed pretty intact. However, what was the most poorly guarded secret in Shelburne, because you know most of the personnel had wives, husbands that lived here, right? Was the fact that no, this was not an oceanographic research station. It was a submarine. It was a listening post. In layman's terms, a listening post. And you know how? Here's one more thing. Do you know how the purpose of the base got revealed? Because in the last 10 years they had to endure that, and they didn't give up the lie right away. 5 women. This is back in a time around 85 when gay people did not have rights in the military. Were discovered to live a lesbian lifestyle and that involved promiscuity, and they were considered to be potentially a blackmail target, which is something they felt they couldn't have here. And they were all let go and drummed out of the force, and it got national attention. And a Dow journalist and professor there, Dan Middleman, got onto the story and interviewed them and released what the true purpose of the base was. That's how it got revealed. And it became a national news story. More so on shows like W5 when only one of the women they had extreme concerns, and she was interrogated and included days of sleep deprivation and some pretty harsh treatment.